How's it going? And welcome back to another episode of Mood for Feud. I'm your host Katia, and today I am in the mood to talk about the dramatic downfall of Bon Appétit, specifically the downfall of the YouTube channel, which used to document the different editors working at Bon Appétit and film them using the iconic test kitchen. And in this episode we are going to cover the very unexpected cancellation of Bon Appétit staff who were working for the company in 2020, and then take a look at some of the aftermath, what chefs decided to remain at Bon Appétit, which ones left, and where they are now. Remember, if you enjoy the show and would like to support it, then please do leave a rating. You can leave a comment on Spotify, written review on Apple Podcast, and you can follow the show so you never miss an episode. I'm also on socials at Mood for Feud, and I'm always looking to chat pop culture, so send me a message there. So Bon Appétit was a very popular food magazine that was under the Condé Nast umbrella, and we're going to take a look in a minute at how Bon Appétit kind of made the pivot from traditional print magazine to a very sensational YouTube channel. And I'm very excited to talk about this one because I have a lot of nostalgia with watching Bon Appétit. I first got into their channel, it would have been in 2018. My boyfriend actually was the one who showed me the episode where Brad Leone goes mushroom foraging. That was the very first episode I ever watched, and I'm not gonna lie, when he first put it on and was like, this is really, interesting, and I saw the title and I just, I was like, a video about mushroom foraging. I mean, I love eating mushrooms, but I don't know if I need to see all that. And very quickly, I was very, very hooked because although the topic at hand might not be, it's information that I might never use. I don't think I'm ever going to go mushroom foraging anytime soon anyway. There was something about the personality of Brad Leone, the kind of masterful editing and filming from his camera operator, Vinny, and the editor who I think was Matt Hanziker. Together, it really crafted this very personable, casual editing style, which was very addictive to watch. Brad would often speak directly to his cameraman, Vinny, and so you kind of felt like you were part of the production in a way, like you got glimpses behind the scenes. It wasn't overly produced. They didn't edit out mistakes or slip-ups or, it felt very, very casual. And aside from the production quality, you could think that you were watching just like a couple of dudes going mushroom foraging, right? And I think there was something very appealing about that candid type of footage. Another big hallmark specifically for Brad's videos on the channel was this kind of, I don't know, I guess I would call it like editor sass. So you had a bit of interaction between the host and the editor, this kind of like sassy, friendly relationship. One moment that I always kind of think about to exemplify that is when in that mushroom episode, actually, Brad is wanting to ask the other mushroom foragers why they use baskets, and he's like really, really stumbling over all of his words to get the question out, and the editor in post had just put the text on top of the screen, why do you use baskets, right? Because that's clearly what he's trying to get to. That's the point he's trying to make.
So I noticed you go, I'm kind of, looks like I'm going to have to get one, but I noticed you guys got these really cool little baskets. Is there a reason you guys carry baskets, compared to like a little, other than it being super cute and all, is there a beneficial to putting your mushrooms or whatever you're harvesting in there compared to like a plastic bag?
I've certainly seen people use plastic bags.
But leaving in that ramble and then having that little sassy text edit, I don't know, it makes it all seem very funny, very lighthearted, and to be honest, quite opposite to what you would imagine a Bon Appetit YouTube video to look like in terms of style and feel. So from that one episode, I very quickly started to binge the rest of Brad Leone's content. I then got into watching some of the other chefs as well, like Claire Saffitz's Gourmet Makes, Carla Lully Music's Back to Back Chef. Like there were just so many good series that were part of this channel, and yeah, very bingeable content. And As I was rewatching some of my favorite videos in prep for this episode, it really just made me appreciate all of those kinds of hallmarks that made the channel so successful. So let's talk about how this magazine, Bon Appetit, came to become such a YouTube sensation. The Bon Appetit magazine originates from 1956. It was originally made as a giveaway at liquor stores. It would have different recipes on it, and I guess if you bought some bottles of wine, it might have like some info of good meals that you can cook to pair with your wine. So it was initially a giveaway, and then in 1975 it was sold to Knapp Communications. Now, Knapp Communications at the time also owned Architectural Digest magazine, and around this time is when it went from being a store giveaway to a subscription-based magazine, as it continues to be to this day. In 1993, Knapp Communications was purchased by Condé Nast Publications, and Condé Nast is obviously a huge media company. They have a lot of famous magazines and digital media companies that fall under their umbrella, including Vogue, The New Yorker, GQ, Vanity Fair, and of course Architectural Digest and Bon Appetit. In 2011, the Bon Appetit headquarters moved from LA to New York, and this is also around the time when Adam Rappaport was hired to be the editor-in-chief of the magazine. Now, I find this timing interesting. 2011 is right on the precipice, I would say, of what I guess I would call the BuzzFeedification of the internet. And we were seeing a sort of rise in millennial coded content, I guess, but a lot of traditionally print mediums were turning to digital spaces like YouTubes or blogs to kind of keep up with the times. People were craving more behind the scenes type content. People were wanting to be personable with the people who worked at these traditional publishing houses. And so I think BuzzFeed was amongst the first to kind of make that sort of pivot and really reintroduce the way that news outlets and media houses would look with the rise of the internet. And so over the next decade, we saw a lot of magazines make that kind of shift from being first and foremost a magazine to then running quite successful YouTube channels and actually putting a lot of production and budget into having a, really stellar online presence. And I guess a couple of examples that jump to mind is, for example, like Vogue's Get Ready With Me or Vogue's Beauty Secrets. You also have the Architectural Digest house tours, the GQ couples quiz, the Vanity Fair lie detector test, Variety Actors on Actors, Wired's Web's Most Searched Questions, like the list goes on and on. And amongst these was, of course, Bon Appetit. And they followed suit, turning their attention to digital social media spaces, and in 2012 they launched their YouTube channel. At this time, the magazine had slowly been in a decline. It had been tanking. Print subscribers were dropping in numbers. It was struggling to draw in new subscribers as well. So whilst they catered a lot to like a middle-aged to older audience, there weren't new subscribers, young subscribers coming into the magazine's readership. They were kind of struggling. And so I think this last-ditch effort at making a YouTube channel was kind of an attempt to, give this online thing a go, see what we can make of it. Now, in 2012, when the channel started, they began filming videos in what is known as the Bon Appetit Test Kitchen. And the Test Kitchen was, I guess it's exactly how it sounds, picture multiple cooking stations, multiple stove tops, every single kitchen appliance that you can think of, every single knife, and a massive pantry and walk-in fridge freezer with every single ingredient you could ever dream of. So really like a chef's paradise, I can imagine, in terms of having the ability to kind of create any kind of recipe that you're wanting to. I think primarily this space before the YouTube channel was used, for the editors to come up with different recipes, to test out different techniques that were then going to get put into the magazine, of course. But they started to film in here for their YouTube channel, and it started off with very basic how to cook videos, and they were very in the style of what you would see on BuzzFeed's Tasty channel, where you've kind of just got a top-down view of some hands preparing a meal or a close-up of a pan frying something, but it wasn't very personable. And so the content wasn't doing amazingly. The videos felt very disengaging, and while they might appeal to someone who was wanting to know how to cook that specific recipe and was sort of following along in their own kitchen, they weren't friendly for a casual casual viewer or for someone just looking to be entertained. I'd say they were a little bit niche, I guess, and very much still in that polished but also cold style that you would expect from a magazine like Bon Appetit. Now, in 2016 is when the channel makes the change from this disengaging content to being personality driven, meaning that you had, chefs talking to the camera, and the video was just as much about watching them as a person as it is about watching what they're cooking. So BuzzFeed News did an interview with staff at the time to kind of understand how this shift in content came to be, and it was actually pioneered by Brad Leone. So Brad Leone was very big into fermentation, and he was working as the test kitchen manager at the time, but decided to film a video showing how to make kombucha. And the video was very chaotic in nature. Brad is a very casual, down-to-earth type of guy, so I feel like naturally his content wasn't going to be that sort of overly polished type, right? It was just a guy from New Jersey making kombucha type of thing.
Today's crazy. Whoa, PG-13, right? It's a family show. Since today's been so busy, haven't even gotten to unpack the fresh stuff. It shouldn't look so messy in here. Usually this will be all unpacked, but me and old Vinny Babini over here, we didn't get to do that yet. So that might even have to wait till tomorrow, because we got booch to make. Come on. And I really just want, oh God, cut, Vin.
What happened, Brad?
Oh, tragedy over here.
Is this your first time making kombucha, Brad?
It sure looks like it.
They filmed all this. They didn't think much of it. They didn't really know what to do with it, and the footage sat in the editing room for about 8 months. And that is when Vinny, the aforementioned Vinny, digs up this footage, clips together a bit of an edit, but not in the usual how-to style of video, but actually just a more personable, friendly, I guess comedic in a way, style of video. And he shows this edit to Matthew Hanziker, who was another editor, and then he ended up adding sound effects and graphics, and they kind of pulled together what we now know or think of as the Bon Appetit YouTube style, right? They weren't sure how this was going to be received by the higher ups because, as I mentioned, Bon Appetit, you're thinking posh, snooty magazine, and to come out with this very casual video, it seemed like it could potentially be seen as going against the brand. But they pitched it anyway, and as it turns out, the editor-in-chief, Adam Rappaport, really loved it. In the BuzzFeed News article, he is quoted as saying, "I saw it, I loved it immediately because it felt like we were just hanging out with Brad, and as co-workers of Brad, we were always so amused and so enthralled by all things Brad. They just let Brad be Brad, and that's not easy to do because typically with TV and video it gets overly thought out and overly produced and plays a bit too safe. They often don't let people be themselves. People turn into these weird TV people when there's a camera on them." And so this is how Bon Appetit first came up with the series It's Alive with Brad Leone, which in itself, that series title was a joke because at the time, nobody knew who Brad Leone was, right? He wasn't a household name or anything, but it was just another way to kind of quip or play into the joke, I guess. As you can imagine, the videos were very successful. It became less about learning how to make the dishes and actually being able to enjoy the videos as a piece of TV. And as the series took off, Bon Appetit was inspired to take a look at its other editors who were working for the magazine at the time and see what other shows could be presented. And as the cast grew, the Bon Appetit fandom base grew as well. People had their favorite chefs that they enjoyed watching, but it was also interesting to see them interact with one another. As I mentioned, the test kitchen is essentially one big room, and so you might be watching Brad Leone ferment something, but in the background you can see Claire Saffitz mucking around with some pastry. Maybe Chris Morocco walks into frame and gives Brad a bit of advice for a fermentation stage he's stuck on. So it almost felt like you were watching an ensemble cast, even if you had, certain members that you would watch more than others. I guess you can kind of think of it like The Office, The Office if it was in a kitchen. And it really made you feel like you were seeing the authentic kitchen, right? You were part of it. It felt like you were just in their workplace, watching people at work do what they love without kind of anything being put on for the cameras. And you even got to know who the people were that were working behind the scenes, maybe not even necessarily as chefs or as editors. Like, for example, the fan base knew about Gabby, who was the test kitchen manager. We knew that Rhoda was the one who would order in the ingredients. So if you wanted something specific, you had to go see Rhoda. And it just builds this sort of family picture, I guess. It really does feel that way, where you feel very much like you're involved with the company. And even Adam Rappaport, right, who is the editor-in-chief, like, you know, you'd think as the high-level exec, he'd be very removed from the kind of happenings of the test kitchen, but even he was known to the fandom, and, you know, from the occasional times that he would pop into the test kitchen and kind of be in the background of a video, or maybe sort of come and see what a chef was doing while they like nervously looked at him staring at them. And I guess the fandom joke with Adam Rappaport would be to timestamp in the comments the like part of the video where he was visible and be like 17 minutes 24, random daddy appears. That was what he was known as to the fandom. People even started meme accounts about Bon Appetit. Like, it really was quite well known in the internet space, and a very beloved channel. A lot of people's like comfort watch, I guess you could say. Now, there were a few main test kitchen shows aside from It's Alive with Brad Leone. There was Gourmet Makes with Claire Saffitz, where Claire would attempt to remake popular processed food, like for example Twinkies or Starburst or Skittles, and she would try to kind of make a gourmet version of them. And that was one of my favorite shows because Claire is a very type A type of person, so watching her get frustrated and fail to, you know, remake something was comedic in itself, but you really got to also see her capability and how she would problem solve, right? Like, okay, my taffy is too soft, that means I need to like crank up the heat and I need to add more of this in, and just seeing her kind of go through the motions of figuring out how to tinker with texture by making these like minuscule little changes. It was really interesting. Like, it's exciting to see someone who is just skilled at their craft. Another show, Reverse Engineering with Chris Morocco. Chris would blindfoldedly taste a famous dish by another chef and then recreate it without ever having seen the dish. So just going off of smell, taste, the textures he's noticing, the feel of it. So again, someone who's very like attentive to detail, seeing them kind of break down and recreate these recipes. You had Back to Back Chef with Carla Lolly Music, where they would bring in a celebrity, and Carla and the celebrity would be cooking back to back, and the celebrity would have to try follow along using only Carla's verbal instructions. So they were very creative with the different shows, and it really just meant that there was something there for everyone. So they opened themselves up to a much broader audience than they initially did with their how to cook videos. Now, alongside these editors who had their own series, there were also other editors who would support or feature in a couple of videos, and these were Andy Baragani, Christina Shea, Sola L. Wiley, Priya Krishna, Rick Martinez, Emil Stanek, Molly Baz, and as I mentioned, Gabby Malian. And then as well as having these individual series, you would also get crossover episodes, like for example the Making Perfect series, where each of the chefs would team up to make the perfect Thanksgiving, for example. And so you'd have two people making the turkey, you know, two people making the sauce, two people making sides, two people making dessert. So those videos were probably some of my favorite because you got the whole cast together. It was just wholesome content. It was just very, very feel good. And unfortunately, it couldn't be further from the true reality of what was happening off camera and the kind of injustices that were embedded into the organization. So let's get into the downfall. Everything kind of comes crashing down in the first week of June 2020. And to kind of set the scene a bit, I guess, obviously we had the global pandemic. You know, it was already a very like tense time for society. But on the 25th of May, so less than a week beforehand, is when George Floyd was brutally murdered in a violent act of police brutality by a white officer, which sparked protests against racial injustice in law enforcement, but also racial injustice in society at large. So it was a very critical time where a lot of people were turning to the companies that they supported or that they were consumers of and actually going, hang on, like how, you know, are you committed to making sure that there is no injustice, racial injustice within your company? Now, as all of this is happening, on May 31st, Bon Appetit makes a statement on Instagram that reads, "Food has always been political." And in their caption, Bon Appetit states states that it is going to commit to spotlighting Black-owned food businesses in cities across the US and focus on tackling more racial and political issues and share stories from restaurant owners and staff who are on the front lines of protests. And then they also encourage followers to donate to causes that are fighting racism. So, of course, all good things, right? All things that I agree with. Absolutely, food is political. Everything in our world is political. And racial injustice, unfortunately, seeps into every single industry, right? Nobody is exempt. This isn't a law enforcement issue. It's like a worldwide global issue. All good things, but remember the timing. Like, at this time, people are incredibly outraged. Businesses are being boycotted. People are being cancelled. There are a lot of statements going around at this time from businesses. And so it was starting to feel a little bit disingenuous because it almost felt a little bit like too little too late. Like you waited for this massive global event to take place before you decide to spotlight Black-owned businesses. Like, this is what it took for you as a magazine to decide that food is political, you know? Like, and I think as well, a lot of companies around this time who were speaking out about racial injustice for the first time, it was coming across a little bit as trying to save themselves from being boycotted or trying to speak out to ensure that their customers kept buying. Like, it just felt like a business move rather than something genuine. Now, of course, I can see both sides because at this time, people were also demanding companies to make statements, right? People were asking for people to speak up. So it is a bit of a catch-22 where if you do or you don't, you're kind of in the shit a little bit, and there's kind of like not a perfect way to broach the subject. Now, following this statement, people start talking about the diversity within Bon Appetit, and to be fair, there was diversity with the editors, but it was to an extent. So the editors overall were culturally diverse. There were dishes featured on the YouTube channel and in the magazine that were also diverse, but there were also underlying injustices. For example, most of the editors who had their own shows on the YouTube channel were white, and most of the people of color featured on the channel were assisting or supporting their white colleagues, right? I do want to shout out a very good article that I read about this. It's by Soleil Ho, and it was written in the San Francisco Chronicle, titled "The Bon Appetit Test Kitchen's Race Problem." And this article is very interesting to me because it came out in January 2020, so before the actual systemic racism within Bon Appetit was revealed, before the murder of George Floyd. Like, it was written at a time where the only material that Soleil had to go off of to write this were the existing YouTube videos. Soleil points out that, quote, "Once you actually watch the videos, it's easy to see how often staffers of color are sidelined or relegated to cameos on their white colleagues' shows." Soleil also points out that although there are more diverse editors emerging and sharing recipes, these are often within their own cultural expertise. And so that is quite limiting, right? If you've got someone from India, but the only content they're allowed to make are Indian dishes or Indian cooking techniques or using Indian ingredients, yes, that is great, and of course it's awesome to have visibility on non-white food, but it is also very limiting for that creator, and I guess it almost pigeonholes them or makes them a spokesperson or an expert of an entire community that contains many different regions, many different histories. You know, it's also a lot of pressure to put on an individual. And so Soleil in the article speculates on whether Bon Appetit's editorial tack is to push hosts of color to focus on their own ethnic home cooking instead of the broader repertoire that the white hosts like Molly Baz and Christopher Morocco get to dip into. Yeah, I think it's an absolutely valid critique to make, because if you're truly an inclusive organization, then people wouldn't be pigeonholed or limited to only talk about food that is from their own culture. And I will link the article in the show notes because I think it's a good read and I do encourage people to check it out. It gave me a lot to think about. Anyway, back to the timeline. So Bon Appetit puts out the statement, people are getting critical, and on June 4th, a Puerto Rican food writer, Ileana Massanet, makes a post explaining that she had actually pitched pitched a story to Bon Appetit about Afro-Puerto Ricans that make rice fritters, and that the pitch got declined on the basis that it was, quote, a story that could have been told 5 years ago. And so in her tweets, Ileana's arguing that Bon Appetit actually has not much appetite for Puerto Rican representation in their dishes. She writes, quote, so before we go praising them for patting themselves on the back, for showing solidarity during a time when it would be bad for businesses to not show solidarity, maybe we can get some full print issues of the regional foods of Puerto Rico. Adam Rappaport actually replies to her post saying, strongly agree with all of this. We are actively working to bring new faces and POVs onto our staff, including the test kitchen, to ensure lasting change. This will happen. Ileana and Adam continue to exchange private messages, which Ileana does share online, and Adam explains that her position as a freelancer coming in with a pitch is a tougher route to getting greenlit compared to existing editors, and he also gives examples of times where ethnic dishes and ethnic food were spotlighted on the YouTube channel. But I think Ileana's point still stands that the YouTube channel up to that point hadn't spotlighted Puerto Rican food. On June 8th, Tammy Tekla-Mariam, a food writer, shares a screenshot of an Instagram post which depicted Adam Rappaport dressed in a costume which was intended to depict a heavy quote marks stereotypical Puerto Rican look. And Tammy captioned this photo, I do not know why Adam Rappaport simply doesn't write about Puerto Rican food for Bon Appetit himself. Now the screenshot was from a photo that Adam's wife had shared of the two of them dressed in a Halloween costume, as I mentioned, super inappropriate. It was captioned TBT, me and my puppy, so it was a throwback photo, and later we find out that the original photo had been taken in 2004. This immediately, for obvious and good reasons, sparks outrage, and some people also believe that Adam is doing brownface in the image. Adam himself has denied that he was wearing any kind of makeup or tan or anything to darken his complexion in the photo, but he did of course say that the costume, regardless of this, is completely inappropriate. Either way, it doesn't really change much. It's an inappropriate costume regardless of whether there's brown face or not, right? But I think it brings up something that I find very interesting when, especially around 2020, when people were resurfacing a lot of old photos, old tweets, old videos of people doing or saying things that are racist, homophobic, xenophobic, everything under the sun. And oh, maybe I have a bit of a hot take for this and I'm scared to share it, but I think I want to open up a dialogue about this. So of course, if you disagree with me, let me know, because I don't claim to hold all the answers. But I just think, and I'm not necessarily talking about Adam Rappaport's photo here, it's just prompted me to start thinking about this. But I never know how useful it is to social injustice when we dig into the archives of people, we find moments from years, maybe even decades ago, where they have behaved inappropriately, and we hold this over them and we give them absolutely no space to rectify the bad behavior, right? I don't know how useful that is. And so I guess my hot take is kind of that I don't think people should be condemned for something that they did in their past if, and there's a very big if here, if, number one, they accept accountability and they apologize profusely to the communities that they have hurt, right? Regardless of how old the photo is, regardless of how long ago it was, it causes pain back then and again today in real time. So if, number one, they hold themselves accountable and apologize, and number two, if we have seen a change in their behavior, if we have seen that they have educated themselves, they have learned, and that it truly is a mistake from the past and not true to the values and beliefs that they hold today. Now, with Adam, this is not the case, as we're about to find out. It was an old photo, but he was himself contributing to racial injustice at Bon Appetit. So again, it doesn't apply to him, but I think it is important for us to think about what good we are doing when we hold a past mistake over someone's head and don't give them an opportunity to rectify it. And again, assuming that this person has since grown, developed, evolved, learnt, as a person. Is that a hot take? I don't know. You guys let me know. You guys be my vibe check for this one. Now, also on this Instagram post, there are comments from Jane Larkworthy, who's the editor-at-large of The Cut, and Christine Mulkey, who's the editor-at-large of Bon Appetit, and Jane actually posted an apology for her comment under the photo. And as I mentioned, people were understandably and rightfully upset at this image, and many employees at Bon Appetit were quick to also condemn the image. Priya Krishna made a statement saying, "As a Bon Appetit contributor, I can't stay silent on this. This is fucked up, plain and simple. It erases the work the BIPOC on staff have long been doing behind the scenes. I plan to do everything in my power to hold the editor-in-chief and systems that hold up actions like this accountable." Joseph Hernandez, the research director at Bon Appetit, also makes a statement saying that he is appalled and insulted by the editor-in-chief's choice to embrace brownface, and goes on to say that he has spent his career celebrating Black, Latin, Indigenous, Asian, and people of color communities. Alex Delaney makes a statement saying he's disgusted by the photo of the editor-in-chief in brownface and stands with and thanks the BIPOC staffers at Bon Appetit. Andy Bargani also speaks out about it and says that it is beyond inexcusable and shows support for fellow BIPOC staffers. But I think the most eye-opening response comes from Solar L. Wiley in Instagram stories. Solar writes, "I am angry and disgusted by the photo of Adam Rappaport in brownface. I have asked for his resignation. This is just a symptom of the systematic racism that runs rampant within the Condé Nast as a whole. I've been at Bon Appetit for 10 months. I am 35 years old and have over 15 years of professional experience. I was hired as an assistant editor at $50K to assist mostly white editors with significantly less experience than me. I've been pushed in front of video as a display of diversity. In reality, currently only white editors are paid for their video appearances. None of the people of color have been compensated. I demand not only the resignation of Adam, but also to see BIPOCs given fair titles, fair salaries, and compensation for video appearances." This is what I mean by saying Adam's photo was not the only problem here, right? When we think back to the cancellation of Bon Appetit, it always comes back to this image. And the photos from 2004, I'm not saying it was right in 2004. It was never right. But as I've mentioned before, in my opinion, you shouldn't hold people to a mistake that they made in their past before perhaps they got themselves educated, before they learned and grew as a person. However, as we know from Solar's statement, Adam hadn't learned, hadn't evolved, hadn't grown, and certainly wasn't respecting the BIPOC staffers at Bon Appetit with the same level that he was respecting white contributors. So this statement was massive. It came as a huge shock. People didn't know, fans didn't know that the likes of Solar, Christina weren't getting paid for their appearances in the Test Kitchen videos. That was crazy. You know, the channel, as I mentioned, was hugely successful. It was a legitimate source of revenue for Bon Appetit, as Adam Rappaport himself mentioned in an interview with BuzzFeed. So it would be like somebody contributing to an article in the print magazine and then not being paid for that. I mean, it's unfathomable and it's inexcusable. But not only were the fans unaware that people of color were not getting compensated for video appearances, but a lot of other editors at Bon Appetit were also unaware of this. Molly Baz and Carla Lully Music both make statements at the time saying they will no longer appear in videos until BIPOC colleagues have equal pay and compensation for video appearances. And a lot of the other staffers also make statements, you know, expressing outrage that the BIPOC editors were not being paid. I mean, yeah, it's truly so unfathomable. It's so blatantly racist as well. But again, it's just such a great example that even if you watch a channel religiously, even if you think you know a workplace, you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. Now, Solar's statement got a lot of traction and more people started calling for Adam Rappaport's resignation, and that same day he does announce that he will be departing his role from Bon Appetit. He writes, quote, "I am stepping down as editor-in-chief of Bon Appetit to reflect on the work that I need to do as a human being and to allow Bon Appetit to get to a better place. From an extremely ill-conceived Halloween costume 16 years ago to my blind spots as an editor, I've not championed an inclusive vision, and ultimately it's been at the expense of Bon Appetit and its staff as well as our readers. They all deserve better. The staff has been working hard to evolve the brand in a positive, more diverse direction. position. I will do all I can to support that work, but I am not the one to lead that work. I am deeply sorry for my failings and to the position in which I put the editors of Bon Appetit. Thank you. And I do think this was the right call for Adam to make. As he mentioned, he is not the right person to drive the change for Bon Appetit to become a more inclusive brand. He has his own blind spots, he has his own privileges, powers, prejudices that he hasn't acknowledged and that he maybe isn't even conscious or aware of, which might even be worse, I don't know. And so he did make that decision to step down. But the internet was not done. The internet, the Bon Appetit, they were not off the hook, because meanwhile people had started to dig into some of the other editors who work there and, you know, go digging around in the internet archives. The first thing to get brought to light was a picture of a Confederate flag cake that Alex Delaney had baked for a friend when he was 17, and the picture was one he had uploaded to Tumblr. Now, at the time, Alex Delaney had baked this cake because his friend was moving to South Carolina, so I think it was meant to be a bit of like dark comedy type of humor, but of course it was extremely inappropriate to depict such a hateful flag onto a cake. Delaney did apologize for this and pledged to donate his next paycheck to the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, and then he also said he would continue to donate to charities and organizations who are fighting for progress. However, shortly after this statement, a Vine video of Alex was resurfaced, and in this he is using homophobic slurs. Andy Barani then called out Alex Delaney, saying he was very upset by the video and wanted to have a dialogue with him about it, which then prompted a Korean woman who had worked at Bon Appetit to bring up several projects that Andy had spoken to senior editors to cut because of his own petty grievances, and how he would use his own influence and status to kind of red light her work. There were tweets from Matt Ducker, who used to oversee the Bon Appetit video content, that contained racist and homophobic, in huge quotation marks, jokes, though of course they weren't very funny, which prompted Ducker to apologize, and later he actually ended up stepping down from his role at Bon Appetit as well. So it was a real bloodbath, okay? There was a lot of, like I said, people digging around in the internet archives, pulling up posts, photos, videos from, in some instances, you know, like the cake that Alex made when he was 17, and at this point in time he was 27. So people were digging right back, and I'm gonna get myself fucking cancelled. But as I mentioned, you know, I think it is absolutely fair to check people. I think it is absolutely fair to demand accountability. I don't think there's a statute of limitations for hateful comments, right? Something that you wrote 20 years ago can still cause just as much harm today. But does doing this actually detract from the wider issue at hand? A lot of 2020 cancellations were of this nature, right? A lot of it was people digging into the archives and pulling up old videos and such. I mean, that's how Jenna Marbles got cancelled, right? Like, beloved YouTuber Jenna Marbles in 2020, this is how she got cancelled. And I do think that while the intention was maybe right to kind of highlight blatant racism and homophobia in our communities and to hold people accountable, like I said, I do think that in part it took away from the wider deep-rooted issue. And, you know, at the time we were very much condemning businesses who were taking tokenistic action, but we were also hyperfixating on very like surface level issues, like a Confederate flag cake. As bad and, you know, offensive as that is not where we should be directing our energy. That's not the thing keeping slavery alive. You know what is keeping slavery alive? Shein and Temu, companies built on the backs of child labor. Organizations like Amazon, who severely underpay and over-labor their staff. You know, in my own neck of the woods, it shows up in the seasonal workers that are hired from the Pacific Islands and come to New Zealand to pick fruit over the summertime and are, in some instances, not always, but in some cases, severely underpaid, have inhumane work conditions and experience really inhumane behavior from their employers. Like, for example, one couple who were found to be confiscating passports of their workers for the duration of their stay. You know, like really, really horrific stuff, to the point where New Zealand had to create a Modern Slavery Act to kind of put some policy in place against this type of behavior. So in my mind, these are the things that we need to be directing our attention to and pushing our efforts to, because this is what's keeping like racism and slavery alive. I'm always a little bit torn at how useful it is to outright condemn someone for something that they did so many years ago if, and again this is my big if they have shown accountability, they've apologized, and they've also demonstrated that they have learnt and changed as a person. Like, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I've always been perfect. I had to do a fuck ton of learning and educating to show up as the person that I want to be in society, okay? That didn't happen overnight. But to me, the more important thing is that I have committed to changing, and I have committed to learning, and now do my best to fight against social injustices. So what a rant, but like, I'm so interested to hear what people think about this, and maybe I am way off base. Maybe I have way more learning to do, and if that is the case, like, please start a conversation with me, a constructive conversation with me, because I'm not going to sit here and pretend I know everything. Now, amidst all of this, on June 9th, Business Insider publishes a comprehensive report that they have been working on since before the scandal even broke. And I think the timing was excellent for this report to get traction, but I do feel like Bon Appétit's racist practices were going to get brought to light regardless of whether that image of Adam Rappaport was resurfaced or not. Now, in this report, Business Insider spoke to 14 Bon Appétit employees and contributors who each commented on the systemic racism within the company. The article starts with Ryan Walker Hartshorn, who is a black woman who was hired as Adam's assistant for nearly 3 years. Ryan explains that days after Bon Appétit posted the "Food is not political" statement, she had asked Adam for a raise or at least 2 weeks vacation, citing that her base salary of $35,300 had never increased throughout her tenure, and this was despite her doing duties beyond what was expected of her position, including cleaning Adam's golf clubs, fetching his son's passport, and teaching his wife to use Google Calendar. Oh my god, when I read that just pissed me right off. What do you mean Adam Rappaport was making his assistant clean his fucking golf clubs? That is absolutely demeaning. That is so disgusting. And also, the salary, $35,300 when you're living in New York, is crazy. I mean, that's like barely enough to live off, I imagine. And, you know, again, we see a real disconnect here of the statement that Bon Appétit made publicly and the way that it was, in the meantime, treating its BIPOC staffers. The article reads, "I thought this conversation might be different this time," Walker Hartshorn said in a recent interview. After all, Condé Nast, the parent company of Bon Appétit, had just donated $1 million to racial justice organizations amid global protests over the May 25 killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis. And her boss, who had been checking in on her throughout the demonstrations, was aware that she had been unable to pay rent for 3 months. Instead, Walker Hartshorn says Rappaport told her, "Well, maybe you should consider that this is not the right job for you. I am the only black woman on his staff," Walker Hartshorn said. "He treats me like the help." Absolutely disgusting. The other contributors who spoke to Business Insider point out that Bon Appétit consistently does not provide equal opportunities to non-white employees, and that BIPOC staffers are often excluded from social and professional groups, and that Bon Appétit regularly misrepresents or excludes entirely stories from non-white backgrounds. And the overall sentiment is that the company treats people of color as second-class staff compared to their white counterparts. Absolutely disgusting. Now, Ricky Martinez, one of Bon Appétit's editors, says that there have been calls for years for Bon Appétit to diversify the videos, to diversify the staff, and to diversify the content, but that nothing ever happens. He says it's the same thing over and over again. Sola also spoke to Business Insider and said that she was paid $60,000 a year and has never received additional compensation for any of the videos she has hosted or participated in. And Priya Krishna also mentioned that it's odd to be held up as this one big happy family to the media when we are all being unequally compensated, and there is an implicit understanding that white talent is more valuable than their non-white counterparts. As part of this report, Sola revealed that she had previously sought an on-air contract after she started featuring in more videos for the test kitchen. She approached Matt Ducker and, requested compensation, as makes sense, but was told multiple times that they couldn't get her an on-air contract because everything was tied up with the legal department. However, interestingly, just 1 hour after Sola openly called out Bon Appetit on her Instagram for not compensating people of color for video contributions. Within the hour, Matt Ducker sent her a contract to add $20,000 to her base pay. So they could do it. If they wanted to, they would, you know? If they wanted to, they fucking would. They didn't want to. That's why she never got her contract. But now that she brought it up publicly, suddenly they're able to knock on another 20,000, which, by the way, Solar says that the people who had on-air contracts over time would make far more than the 20,000 that they proposed to add to her base salary. That just goes to show you how much money this YouTube channel was raking in. And so Solar turned down the offer because it actually still wasn't adequate to address the amount of money that she would be earning if she had an on-air contract and was being compensated the same way that the white editors at Bon Appetit were being compensated. And the people who spoke to Business Insider said that they just felt socially excluded whilst working at Bon Appetit. They called the atmosphere extremely cliquey and difficult to be a part of if you were a person of color. And they said that Adam Rappaport built a very white-centric atmosphere within the company. One person was quoted as saying, "There's just a type of person who works there culturally speaking. Young, attractive, mostly white or white-adjacent people, and upper middle class. Every time I was there, I felt so broke." And Ricky Martinez also added that the magazine went from old and irrelevant and whitewashed content to young and trendy whitewashed content. And Ricky Martinez also spoke about the pressures he felt to confine himself to Mexican food and Mexican cooking, essentially pigeonholing himself. And he also criticized the YouTube channel's tendency to promote or boost videos that were in line with what was trending or that were designed for the algorithms, for search engine optimized content, which meant that most of the time the channel wasn't centered around diverse food because it, wasn't trending or wouldn't do well, or maybe would be something new for the audience and it might not be as engaging. It might not hit the right stats on YouTube. And I get that they are a business, right? The YouTube revenue is significant. They do need to an extent, deliver content that's going to perform well because they're relying on that revenue. However, I do think that a good business, especially one that's trying to be more inclusive and claims to believe that food is political, would strike a balance of doing both, right? Sure, make content that you know is going to do well, create for the algorithm to an extent, and then also use your platform, use your power to elevate diverse voices, to showcase dishes from around the world, to help drive that change as well, I think they could have done both. So following this damaging report, plus the stepping down of Adam Rappaport and other staff members at Bon Appetit, the company decides to release a statement on June 10th, which reads, "We, the staff of Bon Appetit and Epicurious, want to address our readers, contributors, and peers in light of Adam Rappaport's resignation as editor-in-chief." They go on to say that they were complicit in creating a racist culture where white-centric viewpoints were prioritized, non-white narratives were marginalized, and people of color staff members were tokenized and underpaid. They also say they're taking a hard look at their internal operations and have committed to prioritizing people of color for the editor-in-chief candidate pool, implementing anti-racism training for staff, and resolving any pay inequities that are found across all departments by hiring more freelancers of color and investing in them, centering contributions of marginalized people in coverage, addressing appropriation in recipe development processes, and auditing previously published work and vetting subjects for coverage. And then they acknowledge that this was just going to be the beginning of the things that they wanted to change within their operations, and that they were going to commit to dismantling inherent racism within Bon Appetit. Now, a lot of the editors and contributors of Bon Appetit responded to this statement and to everything that had been happening with the company over the past week. There were a lot of statements, so I won't read them all out. They were also all very lengthy, which I think shows just how much this actually impacted, particularly the white editors who had been working there. But responses overall, some editors apologized for their own ignorance and complacency in the system, citing their own white privilege for why they were unable able to see the microaggressions towards their BIPOC colleagues. Others mentioned how they had failed to question whether pay was equal and had never inquired as to whether POC chefs were being compensated for video appearances, and committed to work to be better allies for their BIPOC colleagues and also to hold executives accountable for racial injustices. Across the statements, there were demands for Condé Nast to meet the criticism with action and to actually make meaningful change, pointing out that the Bon Appétit statement made a lot of vague promises and they wanted to see actual, actionable, measurable change being implemented. And then throughout this week, Bon Appétit started contract negotiations with its BIPOC staff, although Sola, Rick, and Priya all decided to leave the Bon Appétit channel as the contracts that they were offered after negotiation were still unfair. So it was trying to do better, but still not good enough. And over the next few months, other editors, including Molly, Carla, Claire, and Emile, all say they will no longer be appearing in video content. At this time, Alex Delaney posts a very lengthy apology for the video and cake image that had resurfaced, and he eventually went on to resign from Bon Appetit the following year. Now, most of the chefs who had been featured in the Bon Appetit YouTube channel actually leave the company. But there were a couple who stayed on, one of them being Brad Leone. He did eventually leave in 2022, but obviously for unrelated reasons from this. Chris Morocco also stayed on and now is no longer doing as many YouTube videos, but I think that's because he has since been promoted to food director. Christina Che also initially stayed on and then left in 2022, and Gabby Molino stayed on to be the test kitchen manager, but said that she would no longer be appearing in video content because it was not being appropriately compensated. And a couple of editors like Emile initially decided to stay with the intent of driving change from within the company, though he did eventually leave a few months later, citing his frustrations with Bon Appetit being slow to implement the changes they had promised. And pretty much everyone else from the original videos from the iconic test kitchen ensemble has since left. Some of them have gone on to join other YouTube food networks, write their own books, start their own businesses, and some have even started their own independent YouTube channels, such as Claire. She has a very successful independent channel titled Claire Safford's Ex-Dessert Person. And guess who is the director of her YouTube videos? It is Vinny. Shout out to Vinny from the mushroom episode. So that's super wholesome that she has stayed in touch with some of the people that she worked with on Bon Appetit. Now, some people at the time expressed outrage at the Bon Appetit editors who decided to stay, but I do want to point out that it is an extreme privilege to be able to walk away from a job, especially in 2020. There was a lot of job uncertainty. There was just a lot of uncertainty in general. So I don't think it's right to condemn people who stayed. And even the people who decided to leave said not to do that. So don't do that, right? There's no villains here. The villains are sitting on the leadership board and not paying staff appropriately. Following Adam's resignation, Bon Appetit hired a new editor-in-chief, Dawn Davis, and then also hired 8 new chefs from diverse backgrounds. And the Bon Appetit channel is still going to this day, although obviously the content has changed significantly, but it does, from what I quickly glimpsed, because I'll be honest, I stopped watching the channel after 2020. It really left a sour taste in my mouth. And even this week, going back to some of those videos that I used to watch all the time, it was the first time that I'd seen them since everything went down. But the channel is still going and the magazine continues. So, final thoughts. I think in my mind, this is one of the biggest cancellations to come out from 2020. I do think that a lot of good came from this very, very terrible situation. Even just in this reading through the statements from the other editors at Bon Appetit and reading their own reflections of how they could have shown up as better colleagues, or ways that they were just ignorant to the system that they were a part of. Unfortunately, I do think terrible situations sometimes do make for the best lessons, right? Sometimes, unfortunately, it feels like we need something terrible like that to happen before people kind of realize or become aware, I guess. So I do think that that is a big positive to come out of this big downfall. But that is all I have for this week's episode. Let me know if you ever watched the Bon Appetit channel, if you were a fan, if you remember the downfall, and let me know what your thoughts are on cancelling people for mistakes that were made many, many years ago. I would love to have a dialogue about this. Don't forget to rate and review the podcast if you enjoy the show, and please feel free to leave a written review or comment. I love my words of affirmation, and you can connect with me on socials at Mood for Feud. If you would like to buy me a coffee, I have a link in the show notes, and all funds go towards upgrading my podcast gear. I hope everyone is crushing their goals this week, and of course, keeping out of trouble. Don't get into any feuds, and I will talk to you all next week. Bye!